Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Let's begin the session. My name is Scott Worden, and I'm the Director for Afghanistan Programs for the United States Institute of Peace. We're very pleased to be asked by the Doha Forum to help co-moderate this session. And we have a short amount of time, so let me do brief introductions and we can get into the conversation. I'll introduce just in the order that you see people here. First, I have Khalid Payenda. He is the former Finance Minister of Afghanistan. Next to him, I have Fatima Galani. She is the former president of the Afghanistan Red Crescent Society and also was a member of the Afghan Republic negotiation team. We have Ambassador Marcus Potzel, who is the ambassador designate to Afghanistan now, but he has also served in that role before and as the special representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan for Germany. We have Ambassador Deborah Lyons, who is now the special representative of the Secretary General for UNAMA. And then finally, we have Rina Amiri, who is the U.S. Special Envoy for Afghan women, girls, and human rights. So this panel discussion is about the topic of humanitarian assistance. We all know that Afghanistan has a grave need, and the levels of assistance that it requires are hard to sustain. We also know that Afghanistan is suffering not just from a humanitarian crisis in terms of the economy and food, but also one of human rights, and the two are interrelated. So we want to hear from our panelists, one, what are the contours of the problem right now? What are the obstacles? And secondly, how to overcome them? Also the difficult political trade-offs that need to happen and how to alleviate the problems of human rights, and help the Afghans, but also pressure the Taliban to improve governance and improve their own systems. So with that, let me turn first to Fatima Galani. You've been to Afghanistan recently, and I want to know from you, what was the situation when you were there?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good morning to all of you. It's a great honor to be with wonderful friends and such great people in one panel. My trips to Afghanistan, each time I go, it opens another door that I see things which needs very urgent but very careful attention to fix it, because we have been always chosen the quick fix and things which was fixed for a little while, but it didn't sustain. This time we cannot afford to do that. What I saw in Afghanistan, working for more than 12 years in the Afghan Red Crescent Society, I was in a very special place to see the suffering of both sides. I could see the suffering of people who were victims of the Taliban attacks, but I was also able to see the attacks on Taliban also, that doing that, lots of people were, ordinary civilians, were very badly, either killed or maimed or really had a difficult time. This time, what shocked me and shook me actually, and then we have to do something about it, is a huge change in Afghanistan was the situation of the middle class. For the last 20 years, when in spite of all the problems in Afghanistan, Afghanistan was able to produce a very good middle class that started a chain of sustainable and good way of income for a taxi driver or a dressmaker and all that, which was very good. They are in the verge of starvation and poverty. This is very, very dangerous because I don't want to undermine the poor people in Afghanistan, but they have always been in focus and they have always been looked after. But the middle class, because they don't look poor, because they don't look miserable, and they can't ask for something. But I remember a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, a teacher, that I pretended that I want to send a gift for her two daughters, and she actually told me that she had nothing to take home for eating for at least 3 days. So this is something that we have to put a very attention to it and a way out of it.
Thank you. Ambassador Lyons, let me go to you next. You're based in Kabul. You're leading the UN mission there. The UN has issued a massive appeal for humanitarian assistance, and there's an upcoming donor conference, as well as for development assistance. What is your understanding of the situation from the ground, and can you give us a bit of the context that underlies these unprecedented levels of requests for assistance in Afghanistan?
Thanks very much, Scott. Well, you started off by saying, what are the contours of the problem? I mean, first and foremost, as I think Fatima really reflected on very eloquently in terms of the middle class, but overall, the first contour of this challenge that we're facing is the Afghan people themselves and this incredible humanitarian crisis. I think everyone is aware of the numbers, but, even before August, we were looking at something like 18 million people, challenged with food scarcity and food security. That quickly rose to 23 million by the fall after the collapse, and certainly also the suspension of the funds that were coming in from the different, whether it was for development or other different investments that were being made in the country, particularly by a number of the major donors. We've gotten through the winter. We've been able to, I think, with an enormous effort on the part of our humanitarian agencies, very consolidated, working very much together as the one UN, to deliver, food and shelter and health care to upwards of 19 million people. I think hitting beyond even the target that we had expected. But we are slowly coming out of the winter. We managed to avoid a famine, but we're still facing a humanitarian crisis. And so we have this humanitarian pledging conference in a few days on the 31st, where we are hoping that we're going to feel a lot of generosity from the donors in spite of what is happening in the rest of the world, which clearly will, I think, have an impact. And we do mention this to the Taliban quite frequently in our engagements with them, that it is not just Afghanistan that the donors are focused on right now. There are many other compelling areas of the world that really are deserving and in need of great attention. But faced with that as well, Scott, is getting through the humanitarian effort, but quickly moving to not development, as you suggested, but a focus on basic human needs, because we do not feel that the donors are quite ready yet for development. Development monies are often conditioned, as many of you know. That is a hard thing to do with a non-recognized government. But we do need to be looking at basic human needs so that we get more support to the Afghan people so they can help themselves. So livelihoods, community resilience, working with the farmers, getting those irrigation canals fixed so that they can start generating incomes in the local communities themselves. Moving the donors to basic human needs is going to be not just a contour as a small hill, it is going to be a tough climb, especially now after Wednesday with the decision on girls' education. So the other aspect of all of this is, how do you maintain both the patience of the donors and the confidence of the donors in this emerging environment now where we're seeing, frankly, more repression than we had seen last fall. Yesterday I was getting messages about women at the airport who were not being allowed to leave because they did not have their maharam with them. They did not have a male relative with them. These were women who were going out for medical treatment with their children, and they were not allowed to board the plane. We have seen intimidation of the media to an incredible degree in the last couple of weeks. So we have a huge challenge in front of us now to continue to work, as we do on a daily basis, being on the ground in Kabul, to continue to work with the de facto authorities to help them understand what concessions are going to be needed on their part so we can continue to maintain and hopefully even increase the confidence of the donors. Because without investment in basic human needs, we're going to stay in a humanitarian vicious vortex that will help really no one.
Thank you. And that actually sets up the next question. I want to go to you, Ambassador Potzel. You're representing Germany, which is one of the largest donors to Afghanistan. You've also had a regional portfolio in your career dealing with these issues. And so I want to ask from a perspective of a major donor, how do you see the challenges in terms of supporting Afghanistan with the difficulties of the Taliban that you mentioned, I also want to ask you, how do you see the relationship between Western donors that have traditionally paid much of the development aid and the region in terms of assisting with this problem?
Yeah, thank you, Scott. First of all, I mean, as Deborah said, humanitarian assistance is unconditioned, and Germany has paid 600 million euro last year for humanitarian aid. We are the co-host for the pledging conference in 4 days together with the UK and the state of Qatar. And we hope that we can raise funds to support the Afghan people without engaging too much with the de facto authorities. Having said that, we are all aware that we have to do more, that our assistance has to go beyond just humanitarian assistance, but that's where the problems start now. Everything that goes beyond humanitarian aid is attached to conditions from our point of view. And if you might call it cynical, but cynical is what the Taliban now do. They're depriving girls to go to school, and it's not only secondary school. It's they don't have access then to university. They don't have access to professional jobs. So it's we have to make clear to the Taliban that they take their own people hostage. It's not the West who's taking them hostage. So we have to be clear on that. And also, it's very difficult for me, for my colleagues, to convince our politicians, our media, our publicity, our taxpayers back in Germany to pay money for a de facto regime that deprives girls of their right to education. And this right, it's founded in international law. There are international covenants on cultural, economic, and civil rights, and Afghanistan has subscribed to that. There's a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Afghanistan has subscribed to that. And Taliban they are violating international law, and they're violating Islamic rules as well, but I'm not credible to talk about that. Fatima John can do that much more eloquently and with much more credibility. But we also call, of course, if you mentioned the regional countries, especially Muslim countries, to call on the Taliban, on the de facto authorities, to respect this right, international law, Islamic rules and regulations. So I think that the region can do more on that. I'm very pleased about the opening conference, the opening plenary session yesterday for the conference, where Qatar really gave a very strong signal to the world, to the region, to the Taliban, and we hope they hear that.
Thank you. Rina and Mary, let me go to you next. And already we've heard mention of rights. Human rights is in your mandate, but you've worked on Afghan issues for decades in different capacities. How do you see the current situation, and what can you say about the nexus between the humanitarian crisis but also the rights crisis that we've heard about?
Thank you very much, Scott. I mean, I think we can say with just a grave recognition that Afghanistan right now faces the worst humanitarian situation in the world and the worst human rights situation in the world. That nexus is there, and it's a situation in which and is unique in a sense in that in many contexts, I've worked in other conflict areas where there's a sense that there's a sequencing that has to happen. You do the humanitarian, you do security, then you get to rights. In this case, because of how perverse the situation is, the one thing I'm heartened by is that there's this solid recognition that is not a possibility, that is not an option. It's all integrated, we have to do many difficult things at the same time. And that's something that the Taliban have to just recognize and come to terms with. And I would say we're not asking for concessions for us. We are asking them to respect what the situation in Afghanistan demands. We are asking them to respect the Afghanistan that is, not their notional Afghanistan that resides in some sort of ideological, aspiration that doesn't align with the gravity of the economic situation on the ground with a starving population, where they want to take 50% of the population out of the workforce and deprive families of even having a possibility of a hope that their daughters can get educated, can work.
so that they can put food on the table and have some sense of a better future. That is what Afghans are asking for. We, the international community, are simply recognizing, and that's standing with the Afghan population is holding the Taliban to account on these issues. And it's hard. It's going to be incredibly challenging. I mean, I can tell you that I personally, I have sleepless nights thinking about the situation of Afghan people and the level of poverty there is. But at the same time, you know, I speak to Afghan women and men every day, and what they say is we have very little space, and it has to be strategic. What we do down the road has to be strategic. Absolutely, humanitarian aid should not be politicized, but we have to calibrate where our sources of leverage are and use them to advance the needs of the Afghan people.
Thanks. I want to talk about that issue more with each of you in terms of accountability and leverage. But before doing so, let me ask Khalid Payenda, you were the last Minister of Finance of the old Republic of Afghanistan. You know the economic situation so well, and many people have noted that the humanitarian crisis is fundamentally an economic crisis, and cash is in short supply. How do you see this from an economic perspective, and what are the contours of that element of the humanitarian situation?
Thank you very much. But what a sad way to introduce somebody, the last Minister of Finance of a republic. But I'll take that. I hope some of the things that I say are heard by the Taliban. They don't make the same mistakes that we made. I'll start with what Madam Kelani said. The middle class, the urban middle class that depended on wages from government institutions, from the donors, they are in a bad situation. Rural poverty has always been a problem, but the urban one has been a recent one. Rural poverty, people are much more resilient. That's a sad thing to say, but government and international donor services never penetrated all the way to all corners of the country. Just before answering your question for the audience, just to give you the magnitude of the issue. There were poverty issues before. We had 57% of people living under poverty line. That's less than $2 a day. That's, as already said, half of the population. The predictions are 97%. I think that's a conservative estimated at this stage. 1/3 of the GDP was wiped out in literally weeks' time. Currency depreciated 30–40%. Inflation rose by 10 to 15%, but food items and basic household goods by 50%. So something that costed 10 Afghanis would now cost 15 Afghanis. So this all has resulted in exactly what was previously said, not just a humanitarian crisis, but a human rights crisis. There has been discussions on the frozen assets of the central bank. Part of the discussions have been that freezing them will solve all problems. I think those the trust and the optimism in that is misplaced, I believe. In a country where only 15% of people have bank deposits, even freeing all of it will not solve all problems. The problems are in fundamentals of economics. The economy does not work. There is no engine. A fiscal sector that does not work. No matter what you do with the banking sector, it will not address most of the problems. Maybe it will solve temporarily the issue for some, but there are problems that would come with it. Right now, you have a banking sector that has issues on so many different sides. They have a non-performing loan portfolio, meaning all the businesses who have taken out loans, they are not able to pay back. The moment these funds are unfrozen, it goes to banks, they're reconciled. What will people do and businesses do? They will withdraw their funds. Whoever can afford to get out of Afghanistan will get out with this money. And that will mean that a few of the 13, 14 commercial banks will collapse. That's, so we have to be careful with some of these issues. My point being, we have to look at the fundamentals of economics. In my view, there is no substitute for a legitimate government. Even if it's inefficient, even if it's corrupt, we see now the problems that we face at the moment. So I have a few suggestions, but I'll wait. I assume that will come in questions to follow.
Great. We'll tease the audience with that, but we will come back on suggestions. I want to turn back to you, Fatima Galani. You, as I mentioned, were on the negotiating team, so you've met with the Taliban many times in different capacities, not just on the negotiating team. They're a big obstacle. We've heard that. What did you learn from that negotiating experience about how to persuade, influence, induce them to make some of the reforms that seem to be necessary?
This is the fundamental problem and probably and hopefully a solution. First of all, they are very frank with things that they tell you that what they can make a decision on or they can't. They don't give you illusion that will tell you yes and tomorrow it will be no. Anything difficult you ask them, they will tell you that they have to consult with their leaders. True that the answer never comes back. They never come with an answer, but they actually can tell you without saying it that I'm not the decision maker. So most of the people that we meet, they are not the decision makers. We have to find a way to fix things and getting to the decision makers. I don't have a solution for it now. We need to find that solution because Afghanistan doesn't have time. Unfortunately, we Afghans are absolutely experts in losing opportunities. And the world is very good at helping us to lose those opportunities. So we have done a fantastic job. 44 years of being in a conflict is not a joke. My daughter was 1 month old when the war started. Her daughter goes to university now. I always, when I look at my daughter, and I resent myself for thinking that because she was born 28th of March, 27th of April, the coup happened and the war started. I can't stop myself to see the age of the war in my daughter, which is very sad. But this is exactly what we all see. We all are waiting for our children, for our grandchildren to live at peace, and we are just losing opportunities. Sometimes I'm criticized to saying this. Today, Taliban say that they are, the whole country is in one hand. Fantastic. Let's work on it. If the whole country is in one hand, that one hand is responsible for removing those obstacles. This one hand should also help the people of Afghanistan to see themselves in this government. Regardless of gender or language or ethnicity, let's work on it. So it is winning a war. We did it. We won a war against a superpower. We won wars after wars. But what did we achieve? Nothing. Why didn't we? Because we didn't go to follow a proper a political solution which is designed by Afghan people and which is performed by Afghan people. Doha talk was a huge possibility, and I think that it was possible to bring peace. And both sides dragged their feet. President Ghani had an illusion that a miracle will happen and everything will go. It didn't. Miracles don't happen. We are bringing those miracles. Taliban also became so sure that it will be an unconditional withdrawal that they were not interested. So who suffered in the middle? It was the people of Afghanistan. And I say it again, that we don't have much time. There are dangers around Afghanistan which will create a huge security problem for Taliban and because of Taliban to the whole of Afghanistan. And we have to put our acts together and do something about it. Very rightly, Deborah, you said that Afghanistan is not the only problem the world has. I'm grateful that still there is some interest in Afghanistan. And I'm telling you that women are instrumental in that thing. I have every hope that women, those women who courageously stayed in Afghanistan and have a very strong voice, new faces, most of them I didn't even know, they are so strong. Each time I go to Afghanistan, they are clear what they want, they are clear what is the argument, and they have no illusion, unlike our previous leaders. So I am hoping that we will have to find a way with those strong voices.
Thank you. Deborah Lyons, let me go to you next. I have the same starting question, which is you've also negotiated or at least discussed with the Taliban many times, and what has that experience told you about how to move the situation in a more positive direction? But I also want to ask you, relevant to the comments that Fatima made about the role of the international community. It's perhaps contributed to some of these problems, not necessarily the UN, but member states. But what is its role now in terms of facilitating a solution? You have a political mission. How do you see that relating to alleviating the overall crisis?
Thanks very much, Scott. You know, when I'm negotiating with the Taliban leadership, and especially since August, both Fatima and Marcus and I were part of the team that was here in Doha during the negotiations. But since August, when you're on the ground in Kabul or Kandahar or wherever it might be, working with them on different issues, you find that there are members of their movement who want to take the country forward, who absolutely are interested in talking with the international community, who want to work through particularly want to work through the economic problems, who recognize that maybe they have a different view of what the social issues and values in the country might be compared to some members of the international community, but they're eager to have those discussions. I have been involved in an array of issues in the last 7 months where I felt we actually did resolve, after lots of debate and discussion, we did resolve the problem we were facing. Whether it was trying to make sure that the young women who had been detained after protesting were released and unharmed, whether it was dealing with some of the issues related to the media, whether it's the issues that we're dealing with right now with the central bank and trying to get the central bank governor and some of their technical experts to move forward, whether it was working with the Ministry of Economy on how NGOs, both nationals and internationals, need to be free to provide the humanitarian assistance that that is critical for us, working with them as implementing partners. So you can resolve issues. You actually can. And there are members, senior acting ministers, who are frankly quite easy to work with and understand the problems that you're taking to them, or that they, in fact, may be bringing to us. There is no question that there is a lack of capacity, no question, not even within the Taliban themselves, but also because they have not brought back the full civil service to function and still have not brought back the female civil service in large part, and a few ministries, but not enough. So you're dealing with questions of capacity as well. I think where we are at right now, though, after 7 months, is we're in a situation where, are we dealing here with two solitudes? Do we really understand who the Taliban are and what it is they are trying to achieve? And I think some of the recent moves, and most particularly girls' education, have brought us to a critical point, a turning point possibly. Rena was mentioning some of this earlier. We know that 87% of Afghans, having been surveyed in great detail, want to see equal access to education for girls and boys. We know that when you ask Afghans who've left the country or Afghans who are thinking of leaving the country, what is the single driving factor? It is the education of their children. So we're at a particular, I guess, as I call it, teaching moment for all of us and for the Taliban. How are we going to move forward, particularly on this issue? If we do not come to some resolution, and it won't be weeks, it will be months, but if we do not come to some resolution on this issue, then I'm very concerned about, as you've just heard from Marcus, how the international community, and most particularly the international donors, will move forward. So when it comes to the international community, you know, I think you can kind of segment it a little bit in terms of different ways in which I think we need assistance from the international community. There is the importance of continuing those political messages. That's important for all to do. We've got an upcoming meeting in China next week, this week actually, the 30th and 31st, where the neighboring foreign ministers, the border countries, will be meeting along with Russia in China, and the following day they'll be meeting with the Taliban delegation. My understanding is that Qatar will also be there, as well as Indonesia, and maybe a few other countries. These are critical countries who are going to be sitting across the table from the Taliban. The messaging they give is absolutely essential, that they present both as a group of Muslim countries, but also as the neighborhood, the concerns about some of these recent decisions by and actions of the Taliban, most particularly girls' education, but also the intimidation of media, the restriction of women's movements, etc. I think the regional countries in particular have a huge role to play in getting those messages because they're neighbors. And as they have said to us in the past, after all of the Westerners go, we stay. We are still a part of this neighborhood. So they have got to stand up and ensure that they've got the kind of working relationship and communications with the Taliban that's going to be essential to move forward, not just on the social issues, but on the economic issues. Because clearly one of the solutions here, and I'm sure you've got much better solutions than I as the Minister of Finance, but clearly the trade with the region is absolutely going to be fundamental to helping Afghanistan move forward. And we have seen in this crazy year that we've just been through, Afghanistan hit its highest mark of exports. Now they're having major problems with imports and other issues related to the economy. But clearly there's a huge role for the region to play, both in terms of getting those important messages across, political and social, but also in helping to build the economy. I think the donors are at a particularly challenging point. And we will see this on Thursday. Humanitarian is unconditioned, but donors also have other parts of the world where they need to be attentive. Secondly, basic human needs, as Marcus was saying, this is an area for those of you who would not have heard this term before. It's moving us from humanitarian over to development, but not quite to development, because development is always conditioned. So what do donors do now with this all-important area of basic human needs? I am telling you, and I am telling the donors, we need to go there. We need to be providing the farmers with the seeds and the funds for the repairing of the irrigation canals so that the farmers can grow the wheat that can feed the people in the fall and in the winter. We need to have livelihood programs so that we're getting cash for work. We're getting money into small infrastructure projects in the communities. These are essential in order for Afghans to be able to prepare for the crisis next winter. But how are donors going to convince their taxpayers that they should continue to fund and actually move forward on the continuum of support, move forward to fund a country that is not, or an entity or a country, I guess, because we're not going to be giving the money to the Taliban. That's obvious to everyone, I'm sure. How do governments decide this when you're talking about the only country in the world is saying that they're not going to educate high school girls, or that women cannot even leave the country to take their children for medical care. So we have got a huge mountain in front of us, but we're going to get through it. And we're going to get through it in the same way that we've done with these other issues that I've mentioned to you. We go in, we sit down, we work it through, we resolve it. Then we go to the next one. These will be a series of building blocks, not toward a speedy recognition, but at least a series of building blocks that will help normalize issues with the economy, I hope, and eventually normalize further in terms of our engagement. Sorry.
Thanks very much. I want to get everyone in before we close. Rena, Mary, let me go to you next. We started on the issue of incentives and leverage, and I want to get you to expand on that. We heard from Tom West yesterday that very stern messages are delivered. I'm sure you also deliver very stern messages. We haven't seen much progress. I guess the question in my mind is, the Taliban must be thinking, or else what? So that's my question to you.
Well, I would note to the Taliban first that, for the last 2 decades, they've said, you have to watch us, we have the time. The time is no longer on their side, and they have to recognize that. Inside the country, it's not on their side. If they continue going forward in the way they are, they will not be able to say, we have ended the war, as they're saying right now, because conflict will start. They say that they want migration to end. They want the brain drain to end. People will migrate out. And they say that they want Afghanistan to not be donor dependent. Afghanistan is not going to achieve that. So, it's one side is in terms of what we can put to them as our sources of leverage or incentives, but they also need to recognize the sources of leverage are inside the country for them to actually get to where they want to get the country. So they should shift their gaze more internally rather than constantly externally. The Taliban spend far more time talking to us. In fact, I would say that it's almost exclusive that they're talking to us, the international community, rather than to the Afghan population. So I would note that as a first point to the Taliban. Talk to the Afghan people. Those are the people you are accountable to. Second, I would say in terms of our sources of leverage, there is a reality. I'm heartened by what Deborah is saying, and I would stress that the option should not be to walk away from Afghanistan. It's not about to engage or not to engage, but it's really becoming very calibrated in terms of looking at what we have at our disposal and how we strategically use it to advantage the Afghan people. And there are a series of things that we are looking at. Deborah noted the building blocks to normalization. Well, that is going to be contingent on Taliban behavior. They want diplomatic engagement with the international community. They want senior level engagement. That is contingent on their behavior. They want to have a presence in embassies. They have aspirations of being a legitimate actor on the international scene. They're not going in that direction. They're going back to pariah status. And that is their own doing. They are aggrieved that that they're still sanctioned. Well, there's going to be no movement in that direction with the course of action that they're taking on women's rights, human rights. It's an inflection point, and right now it's on them to determine are they going to go backwards or let the country go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to close with you, Khalid, for your recommendations, so tee those up. But Marcus, let me just ask you the same from your perspective as also a major donor. What's the biggest leverage and influence do you see, and how do you communicate that to the Taliban?
Thank you very much. I couldn't agree more with Rena. It's a matter of recognition is to gain their legitimacy at home first. Where's the roadmap? Where's the political plan? Where's an economic plan? We've been 7 months into it now, and they haven't come up with any political program, with any government program how to govern the country. They haven't been governing the country so far. I mean, and I don't know whether that's a good idea to replace or the central bank governor by a mullah, to replace the head of the airport authority by a mullah. Deborah spoke about lack of capacity, but it's self-made lack of capacity. I think the Afghan people have it in their hand to hold their rulers accountable, and the rulers have to present a certain social contract to them. I mean, who are the Taliban? Taliban are not a monolithic bloc, and we hear, opposition to the decision to not reopen girls' schools last Wednesday. We hear opposition to that, but they haven't made it public yet, and they still obey to the rule of the hierarchy. I think the supreme leader decides, and everybody has to follow. I wonder for how long the Afghan people will actually tolerate this. And that would be very, very interesting to see. And what can we do? I mean, I think we can try to strengthen those voices in Afghanistan, inside Afghanistan, civil society, for instance, NGOs, to be strong, to remain in the country, to hold their rulers accountable. And that's I think, the Afghanistan of today is not the Afghanistan 20 years ago anymore.
Khalid, let me close with you and posit that the levels of aid that have been provided in the past, that are requested and identified as needed now, are not sustainable for the various reasons mentioned. So revenue would therefore have to go up if you're going to improve Afghans' livelihoods. I want to hear your recommendations, but also hear, what do you see as the path forward in terms of having the economy function so that Afghans can earn a livelihood without relying on foreigners for so much assistance?
Yeah, thank you. So sticking with my economics dismal science, I'll state that there are no easy solutions, unfortunately. Saying that the economy could be revived soon is not very realistic. Having said that, I think it's important to make sure that Afghans don't starve. And the humanitarian plus is crucial. So humanitarian plus maybe health, education, and community development, and some of maybe operations and maintenance of key infrastructure so they don't erode. Beyond that, I don't think you would have the finances given the world's attention, but even with $10–15 billion, it won't be doable without a government. But even with government, that's the issue, is that no country has ever been built and made sustainable on aid only. That's something that we have to acknowledge. Having said that, more can be done with the less money if used properly. I think it's important that common programming versus parallel programming is done. All donors, all UN agencies follow one national program, whatever it is, rather than UNDP having its own portfolio and some other institution have their own. Then you will have a lot of overlaps and misuse. I think then on service delivery and humanitarian, some conditions from the donors on UN, from UNAMA, on UN agencies should be non-discrimination in access. Everybody should have access to those non-interference and recruitment processes, access for monitoring, and right now it's crucial with disappearing media, with disappearing civil society. You need to see what's happening on the ground, and transparency in reporting to donors, reporting to experts, but most importantly, reporting to Afghans who are recipients of these. Focus on well-being of female-headed households. Right now, they are the most vulnerable of the whole population. They are being erased from social life. This includes teachers. This includes civil servants. This includes people in the provinces who've lost a lot of people. There has been talk about brain drain, but there hasn't been talk about what I'd call brain trap. There are a lot of Afghans who cannot get out or do not want to get out. No matter who implements projects, at the end of the day, what I've seen in the last 20 years, it's Afghans who implement the projects, whether it's a UN agency doing the work or a government. So I think using Afghans. I don't hear good things about this. You know, I hear a lot of expatriates coming and taking jobs from Afghans. You know, Afghans are being pushed into administrative jobs where they had done a lot of work on the front lines. You know, a lot of civil servants, you know, who believed in a democratic Afghanistan. A lot of my colleagues who you know, my heart breaks for them. You know, they had opportunities to go out. They had opportunities to go work with NGOs and others. They stuck with the government. Now they are not wanted because they don't come from a particular ethnicity, or they don't have those credentials that Taliban want. When they go and apply in UN agencies, they are asked for a pardon letter from Taliban. You know, I think it's, imagine yourself being in that position and, you know, the betrayal that you've seen. Last thing on the donors, be mindful of your unintended consequences with good intentions. Don't import wheat if you don't see how much is being produced. You will distort markets. You will push farmers into starvation. And the last thing, hold Taliban accountable. They sit on collection of domestic revenues. They have to be accountable of what they do with the public's money. It should not be that the UN and other agencies take care of populations and they use this to build an army to further press Afghans and their needs. So that would be my few suggestions in the medium term. There should be a political roadmap. Unfortunately, decoupling economic policy advice from political and human rights is difficult, and it shouldn't be. I think those are important. There should be a roadmap towards recognition, if there is, with clear demands from the Taliban.
Thank you. We could talk about this for a long time. We're at the end of the session. I like to end conversations usually on Afghanistan with hope. I'm going to settle for realism right now from you. But please give a warm round of applause for our panelists, and thank you for listening.